But I would actually turn this more into less about traditional sports being the parallel and more about music and entertainment being the parallel, because plenty of rappers and singers and artists get recruited well before 18 because they see the talent in someone early. Not all the time, but many times. And so the same thing is happening in gaming, which I find more interesting than sports, because digital entertainment is being driven by the future of gaming.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside. Woo! Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Jay Klaus, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Playing Games to Relax himself, Eric Hornung.
Do you ever get stressed out, Jay?
Do I ever get stressed out as an entrepreneur? Yes. Better question, do you ever get not stressed out, Jay?
Well, see, the way I get not stressed out is I play Call of Duty. I don't know why, I don't know what it is, but something about either, there's three things that like de-stress me. One, sauna, because it's where I think. Sometimes that can also be stressful. Two, shower, because it's where I think. Can also be stressful. Three, Call of Duty, zero thinking involved, and not stressful. A lot of rage sometimes when I'm not playing well, but that's good. It's like it's burning off steam.
A nice dinner with a friend of the podcast, Colleen, doesn't de-stress you?
No, not really. You know, there's still a lot of stress. It's just, that's mostly just venting at that point, you know.
Can't wait to make a flip out of this.
Yeah, she's going to love that, huh?
Which Call of Duty?
Right now, it is Call of Duty Black Ops 4, whatever the newest one is. There's a new one getting released this year, but whatever the most recent one is, where it has the Fortnite knockoff called Blackout. I play with two of my friends.
Is Nazi Zombies still a thing?
Nazi Zombies is still a thing, yeah. And now it's all online. I don't know when the last time you've played is.
Pretty much never. And actually, that was a problem for me. All of my friends played Call of Duty online, and I did not. And I literally felt my friendships weaken because I was not doing that.
It's actually great because it saves you a lot of money, you know? Like some Friday nights, instead of going out to the bar and spending a bunch of money with my friends, I'll just be like, yo, you guys just want to hop on the sticks? And Eddie, who's in Denver, and Pat, who's right here in Cincinnati, will just hop on and we'll spend $0. Maybe order a pizza, so, you know, that's some money. But spend $0, hang out with your friends, shoot the shit for a couple hours, and play some video games.
Have you watched the new season of Black Mirror?
I haven't watched a single episode of Black Mirror.
Whoa, well, first of all, you're doing that wrong. Second of all, the new season has an episode about virtual reality gaming that I think is very relevant to you playing games with your friends.
Is it like Ready Player One?
It is not at all. I'm not going to ruin it for you, because when you do watch it, you're going to realize how much of a burn that was I just made on you.
Oh, you're making fun of me in the future.
We'll see.
Okay, great. Speaking of the future, today we are going to look into the future.
Yeah, today we are talking with Josh Chapman, the co-founder and managing partner of Konvoy Ventures. Konvoy is an early-stage venture fund focused exclusively on esports and video gaming. They're dedicated to partnering with and supporting founders in the video gaming industry and the esports industry at the earliest stages. They were founded in 2017 and based in Denver, Colorado. Eric, we've been looking for someone in the esports realm for months to talk to.
I would say longer than months. It has been a while. And I think we found a great guest here.
I hope so. We've been very intentional. We've been very thoughtful. And actually, it's been very difficult to find a guest in this industry that is not based in San Francisco.
That's true. San Francisco seems to dominate the esports virtual worlds area, but Konvoy is based out of Denver, and that fits our checklist, even though two of their three portfolio companies are in San Francisco. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about the future of esports, the history of esports, and really just learn a little bit about this, because everyone seems to believe, and maybe this is when something's wrong, but everyone seems to believe that esports is going to be huge, but it's hard to find people who have detailed rationale why, other than, oh yeah, it's going to be big.
Yeah, I'm lacking a lot of context and both historical and current You know more about this industry than I do, probably, and I don't think you would fancy yourself very deep into it. So we're going to spend a lot of time, I think, learning about esports and video gaming as a whole before diving into talking about Konvoy. But I'm excited. You ready to dive in?
Oh, yeah, I'm super excited.
Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, how are you?
I am doing well. It is beautiful out, finally, where we are, at least in Ohio. Finally. So, Josh, on Upside, we like to start with a background of the guest. Can you tell us about the history of Josh?
Absolutely. So I grew up overseas, growing up in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. I was the son of a U.S. diplomat. I then went to school in Chicago, worked in New York for a bit, and then about a year and a half ago, I moved here to Denver, Colorado. My career has primarily been in finance. I've grown up a gamer all my life. And today with Konvoy Ventures, this is essentially kind of the merging of my professional training on the investing side and my personal passion as a lifelong gamer coming into, one thing.
Most people, when they say overseas, they really just mean oversea. Like they were over one sea. You did multiple seas for real.
A couple. Yeah. Before I was 18, I think I spent 13 or 14 years overseas. So most of my life was overseas until coming to the States for college and then working in New York and now Denver. So it's also a beautiful day in Denver, Colorado, by the way. But it's always a beautiful day in Denver.
Yeah, you guys have like 300 plus days of sun. It's unfair.
We do. We ski, we play golf, and we play video games. So, yeah, those three occupy my life.
What was the longest period of time you occupied any one of those different cities or countries overseas?
Yeah, 3 years. So Costa Rica was the longest anywhere. Then there was Nigeria, Mozambique, South Africa, Taiwan, Brazil, Bolivia. And so all these places were, not only a key part of just how I grew up personally, but also key part of where I, one, first started gaming, and then two, just how my family kind of grew up.
What was your least favorite place you lived?
It was probably Lagos, Nigeria, and back in the late 90s. And so it was a long time ago, but at that time it was very crowded, lots of traffic. And as a kid, that wasn't the funnest place to be. More fun to be in, jungles or in like places like Mozambique or South Africa. So that was probably the least favorite.
I'm going to fight the temptation to spend like the entire interview on this because I probably could. But were you doing like local public education? Did you have to learn the language? What was social life like? I have so many questions, and I'm just going to let you riff on that.
Yeah. So I grew up, my family's very close. And so I grew up in, American private schools. We had to learn the language in Latin America, learn some Spanish. In Africa, in Mozambique, they speak Portuguese. In Nigeria, they speak English. In South Africa, they speak English. And so it was really just Spanish. But cultural assimilation and being, a visitor in those countries and living there in the culture was certainly a life-changing thing that carries to this day, for sure.
What about this gaming that you were doing growing up? The internet wasn't really a thing yet, so it wasn't online gaming. You weren't interacting. What kind of gaming were you doing? And what was your first... No, let's start with what kind of gaming were you doing?
Yeah, so it was twofold. One, I first started gaming in these small internet cafes in Latin America. And so we would go to this internet cafe that would have, anywhere from 10 to 40 computers. Me and my friends in middle school, and we'd play Counter-Strike and game for hours after school. So from 4 p.m. till 9 p.m. or something like that, or much later. Secondly, my parents actually bought us an Xbox and a projector and a couple computers. And so we had LAN parties at my place where we'd order 10 pizzas and play Halo 1 and then Halo 2 a ton. So I grew up in that sort of world of gaming in those contexts, and that was very formative for me.
What's your first memory of seeing or playing a video game?
My first memory of playing a video game, no one has ever asked me that question.
You called us out earlier. You said you could ask any question. I've been asked them all.
Yeah, that actually I've never been asked. So my first memory of someone playing a video game was when I watched my parents play a game in Nigeria that was hosted locally, just on a disc in Abuja, Nigeria. And they were super into playing this game where they would explore and like unlock levels. And it was kind of like a problem solving game. I saw them kind of get very engaged into that. And didn't think much of it. And then I first started playing video games was probably StarCraft. And then very quickly after that was Counter-Strike and Halo 1. So those were probably the first games that I really played. A lot of people started on Nintendo, and I really don't think that's where I started. I think I got to that later. I've always been more drawn to the more complicated games versus I love Mario Kart, but I quickly wanted to play Halo or Age of Empires or even things like SimCity or Roller Coaster Tycoon or something.
Why are games called video games? Are there audio games? Are there picture games? Like, why do you think video games became the title? And is that still referred, like, now I hear gaming much more than I hear video gaming. So has that phrase kind of gone out of style?
It hasn't gone out of style because gaming oftentimes is referring to the betting industry and gambling. So that is oftentimes called gaming industry. You'll see gaming conferences and then quickly realize it's being hosted in Vegas and it's all about slot machines. Video gaming, I think, goes back to, this industry started in the early 1970s. And so this is a 50-year-old industry now. I believe it started in video because this was first played on monitors where you would have a video display of something that was happening digitally. And so I think it was a game. Game in that time would either be like a game you play outside or a game you play on a board game like Monopoly. But a video game was the way that you segmented what Atari and Nintendo were doing. And so I think that's probably the origin.
Can you walk me forward or kind of give me a history, I guess, of when online multiplayer gaming started happening and what the trend has been in growth in that industry? Like, what has been the catalyst of that becoming such a dominant force I remember when I was in high school, it was huge. When I was in middle school, not as much.
So that is primarily due to the rise of technological innovation alongside consumer adoption of video gaming. The history of video gaming goes back to the 1970s. You had the rise of games like Pong. You had the video game crash of 1983. This then led to things like the N64 coming up. Nintendo in 1991, 1992 decided to try to partner with Sony. That deal fell through in 1994. And then Sony learned so much from their negotiations with Nintendo that they came out with their own console called PlayStation 1 in 1994. In 1995, you had 100 million people playing video games. Fast forward to today, you have 3 billion people playing video games, approaching 40 to 50% of the global population. And so in 1995, you had a lot of people playing games, but it was primarily on console, which is where video games started with N64 and Atari. As you approached 2000 with the dot-com bubble, you had people still playing primarily on dial-up or local area networks because online broadband technology wasn't quite there yet. In the early 2000s, as you walked towards and closer to 2005, 2010, you had online capabilities and online broadband got a lot faster, effectively. As that became faster, it allowed people to become more social with their gaming. So people now are able to game with anyone they want in anywhere in the world, any language, not only just one-on-one or two-on-two, but 100 people at a time across hundreds of thousands of lobbies, right? So because the rise of 4G allowed technologically for gamers to be more social and to be more online multiplayer, that's where you come to today. And so a quick segment from that is that there's a stigma around video gaming that it's an antisocial industry. That isn't without merit because 20 years ago, as you brought up, gaming was inherently, technologically, had a barrier to be antisocial. If I chose a video game, my mom would have to drive me over to my friend's house. I'd carry my Xbox or I'd pick up their controller. And then my mom would pick me up 3 hours later, and then I'd be back home playing alone. This led to the stigma and the visual that people have of what a video gamer is. Today, though, that couldn't be more not true because gamers now are incredibly social. There is entire communities online. There are communities over voice and video. Look at Twitch, look at Discord, look at Reddit. All these things are crushing the community thing. When you look at the gamer today, accessory sales in the United States from 2017 to 2018 were up 87% year on year. That's primarily driven by things like headsets and keyboards and mouses. because gaming is now more social. You want a better headset so that we can better communicate, so that I can hear footsteps and in-game sounds, because I want to be better in a social context. And so because technology has allowed for that, we're at a very unique moment in gaming, not only in the United States, but globally.
Who's left out of this? 3 billion out of 7 point whatever we're at now, 7.2, 7.8, who knows? What large swaths of people aren't being included or are underrepresented in the video game space?
It's primarily the emerging world. We're talking people who don't have access to internet yet, don't have access to the latest smartphone yet, don't have access to internet cell towers that can provide them connectivity yet. If you look at much of the Asian market, gaming computers, if you adjust for inflation, have been coming down in price over the last decade. Same thing with consoles. If you adjust for inflation, they're about $200 cheaper today than they were 10 years ago. And that is a really interesting thing for the consumer. Much of, let's take China, for example, with the rise of mobile in China, they skipped PC entirely. They skipped console entirely and jumped to mobile, primarily because gaming PCs and gaming consoles were so expensive for a consumer that might be making that in total a month or a year, much less depending on where you're looking, right? And so a lot of that population has gone to mobile. The thing, though, is that gaming is a much better experience on PC or console when you have a large desktop. And so today, I think you're going to see the next 2 billion gamers, the next billion gamers that are going to come online will primarily come from the emerging world. We're talking parts of Latin America, much of Africa, a bunch of people in the Middle East, India, a lot of different countries where more people are not only making more money, but also the cost of entry to gaming is coming down. And that's a perfect recipe for another billion people to join the community.
How come women don't game as much as men?
45% of gamers are women, which is a fun fact. 35% of esports viewers are women. And it's just depends what games they like to play. So some of the games that you think of when you think of the most popular games may or may not be some of the most hardcore games. Let's take Halo, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Dota. Whether it's true or not, you might think that women don't play those games as much. It's actually a lot of women play League of Legends, a lot of women play Dota, and a lot of women are actually becoming some of the top Rainbow Six players, CSGO players, and they're actually competing at the highest levels. One thing I love about gaming is that gaming is actually a truly level playing field within the world. It doesn't matter how tall you are, how good looking you are, how strong you are, how fast you are, from a running track and field standpoint. There's no reason that men and women can't be at the exact same level within esports and gaming. And I think that's very unique, right? Biologically and physiologically, men are typically stronger, faster, taller than women, right? On average, right? But even at the top of the level, there is that edge. Within gaming, that edge is eliminated. And so there's no reason that we shouldn't have co-ed esports leagues forever. And those are already happening today.
I think I'm jumping a little bit ahead here into esports. So before I ask the question I was going to ask, let me ask this primer. You threw esports out there. We're talking about video gaming. If I'm a casual gamer playing League of Legends or even Fortnite or some of these names that people have probably heard of, when does it become I'm participating in esports versus I am gaming?
It's a great question. So with 3 billion gamers in the world, 480 million people watch other people play video games. And that is referred to as the competitive audience layer that is supporting the world that we call esports, which stands for electronic sports. This competitive layer of esports typically has to do with people that turn a casual thing that they enjoy into a competitive thing that they start taking more seriously into, hey, I actually want to make this like a career track. So that's anything from me playing pickup basketball with my dad growing up to me going to basketball camps to me getting recruited into a D1 school, right? And just as you see that in sports, the same thing is in esports. Just because you play in a tournament and just because you play intramural frisbee in your college does not make you a professional athlete. The same is true in gaming. Just because you play in tournaments, you go to LAN tournaments, you play in local leagues, doesn't mean that you're competing in esports. To compete in esports, you need to be in the top 0.0001% of 100 million monthly active players who are competing at the top of the game, who are training, who have coaches, who have psychologists, who have, workout routines. It's a pretty extensive industry. So I would say anytime you're wondering, wait, when do you become an esports athlete? Think, when do you become a professional athlete in traditional sports? And the analogy will carry pretty parallel.
What about like collegiately? Because there are some colleges doing this now, right? So there's esports that's not professional, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So there's about 140 colleges in the United States that offer esports programs. The way that they're being structured today is they are not governed by the NCAA. They're governed essentially kind of like club soccer or club frisbee leagues, to just keep that analogy going. The NCAA has just chosen not to govern this at this point. I think that's actually, if you ask my opinion, a healthy thing as of right now, especially given that the average age of an esports athlete is considerably younger than the average age of a professional athlete in most sports. Usually by the age of 24, 26, professional esports athletes are retiring, primarily because they cannot click or have the reaction time that's fast enough. That's typical, and it varies by game, right? Hearthstone is a card game. It's very different. It's kind of like saying that's like chess, whereas Counter-Strike and Dota is like your professional basketball or hockey or something like that. And so when you look at the collegiate scene, I would kind of say it's still no different than traditional sports, where you have a lot of people that are like, I play D1, D2, D3 basketball, but I'm not going pro. I'm just not good enough. I wasn't naturally gifted enough. I haven't trained hard enough. Whatever the reason is, a lot of these athletes, they have aspirations maybe, but is it realistic? Maybe, maybe not. There's also an interesting point that when you go to college, you're between the ages of 18 and 22. But in esports, a lot of these athletes are being recruited at age 14, which is creating a lot of complexities, not only around recruitment, but also underage recruitment, right? And so if these things aren't governed by the NCAA, then who governs them? And there's a lot of stuff in the industry right now around parental consent, around contracts, around agents, around entertainers, very similar to but I would actually turn this more into less about traditional sports being the parallel and more about music and entertainment being the parallel, because plenty of rappers and singers and artists get recruited well before 18 because they see the talent in someone early. Not all the time, but many times. And so the same thing is happening in gaming, which I find more interesting than sports, because digital entertainment is being driven by the future of gaming. When the CEO of Netflix says that he's more worried about Twitch and YouTube than he is Hulu and HBO Go, that to me is like, one, that's 36 months too late to say that, but at least we're there. And so now we're at a point of, yes, this is where the audience is, the consumer is, entertainment is, and now competitive entertainment. If you look at esports, the average age for esports is about 25 globally. The average age for traditional sports is about 50, 55.
For the viewer.
For the viewer, that's correct. So for the viewer, the average age is globally about 25, and for traditional sports is in the 50 to 55 on average. So you're literally looking at a 25-year gap here that to me is astounding. Like, what happened the last 25 years here? So that's interesting to me.
The parallel that you laid out earlier almost reminds me of hockey, where, Sidney Crosby was getting recruited at 7, 8, 9 years old. And the best hockey players don't go to college. They go to the juniors and like work their way up. And then if you're good enough, but not great, you go to college for a couple of years before you maybe make it to the NHL, maybe don't. The question I have about kind of this analogy is, where do like streamers fit in? So people who aren't in that 0.0001%, they're not the best at the game, but they're super entertaining. They host huge Twitch audiences. Like, how do they show up? Do they have to be a certain level of good? Do they have to be like, I just have so many questions about like where that sits in this whole picture we're painting.
The rise of gamers in streaming is very analogous to the rise of entertainers in digital media in general. And so let me explain. So you have professional actors like Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks or any of these professional actors who make a craft out of being really, really good at acting. They have their genres, they have their expertise, they have their theme, and they spend all day, every day practicing and and doing that to the best of their abilities. That is the esports athlete. They have no time to entertain. They're just focused on their craft. This is all they do. Then you have Jimmy Fallon and you have John Oliver, right? These are what I would argue very, very talented people who have chosen a little bit different path, who, one, maybe acting wasn't available to them. Two, maybe they didn't even want to do that, but they are still actors and entertainers at heart. And so more people are signed up to watch Ninja than most people watch The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. And so if you think of Ninja or Dr. Disrespect or Shroud or Tfue or any of these guys are John Oliver and Jimmy Fallon of tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean yesterday. Like, this is already happening, right? So that's the way to really look at the streaming career, is effectively becoming an entertainer. The Tonight Shows and Saturday Night Lives are the same thing, becoming an entertainer. And you can do very, very well at that. What I think is interesting, though, is that if you look at the evolution of media over the last 20 years, you had linear TV where at 7 p.m. every day was Wheel of Fortune, and at 7:30 was Jeopardy, right? And if you didn't tune in during that time, then you missed it. Then we had DVR, and you could record it, but you still had to record it at that time, but then you could record it. Then you had Netflix come in and totally blow that up and said, you can watch whatever you want, whenever you want, but we still curate what is your library, right? Today, if you look at YouTube, Twitch, Mixer, and then a ton of other streaming companies around the planet, you've eliminated the middleman. And you've said, if you are good and entertaining and can build a presence online, no one is going to stop you from doing that. Like, you can go direct to the consumer. You're jumping past Hulu, past Netflix, past the curation process, direct to the consumer. So the evolution of digital media and digital entertainment has been driven by these types of platforms. Today, it's dominated by the gaming community with 3 billion gamers, 480 million esports viewers, 100 million monthly active people on Twitch, 150 million monthly active people on the streaming sites in China. This isn't going away at all. And so when you think about the streaming careers, think of it more as a career in entertainment than anything else.
I think I probably compare Twitch too much to YouTube. So I'd like to hear, one, if that's a valid comparison. But two, while we're on the streaming topic, can you talk about how and who is making money in online gaming streamed?
The comparison between Twitch and YouTube is effectively a battle between Amazon, who owns Twitch, and Google, who owns YouTube. Microsoft owns Mixer, by the way. So the largest companies on the planet with the largest balance sheets see the consumer and want to own the platforms that the consumer is consuming content on. The difference between Twitch and YouTube is not very big in general. It's essentially a land grab of them competing against each other, of how much you're going to offer the streamer in economics, which we'll get into in a second. How much are you going to pay them to exclusively stream on YouTube and not Twitch? Because some streamers will choose to do both or both simultaneously. Facebook did this where they started paying streamers $10,000 a month to exclusively leave those platforms to be on the Facebook gaming streaming service. And those contracts are being done in the back end all the time because you're essentially trying to pull in audiences to keep them in platform, in network, in YouTube, in Twitch, in Amazon store, in Mixer, which is supported by Microsoft, in Facebook, so that you can keep the ecosystem going within the Facebook world. So it's a lot of attention competition by the largest companies in the planet. When it comes to the economics of how these streamers make money, there are effectively three primary ways. One is they make ad revenue, and they split that ad revenue with the platform. There's usually kind of a set number that they'll get, anywhere from 40 to 70% goes to them. The rest goes to the platform. They have more leverage the bigger of a deal they are, but sometimes not. It really depends, because you are not negotiating with a startup. You're negotiating with the largest companies on the planet. So they really have a lot of leverage as well. Secondly, you make it on subscription. So like on Twitch, you can pay $5 to subscribe, which basically is like your Hulu subscription saying no ads, right? And Ninja will keep $3.50 of that, and Twitch will keep $1.50.
Is that determined by the gamer, or is that across the platform the price?
That's pretty standard right there. each gamer or each streamer may or may not have leverage to push on that a little bit, but a lot of times you won't actually even know. So that's kind of a private conversation between YouTube or Twitch and the streamer. But that's pretty much the typical that you'll see. So one is ad revenue for the guys who won't pay and it's just free. That's why you do pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll kind of stuff. Two is subscription revenue, where you have that type of breakdown. So if you look at Ninja having 50, 75, 100,000 subscribers a month at $5 a month times $3.50 for him, those numbers get really big, really, really fast. Now that's, of course, the top of the top of the top. But actually, if you think about this business model, it does create a path to you actually making 40,000 a year, 60,000 a year, 80,000 a year. There is a path to where this can become an actual livelihood for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. You only need 500 people a month to pay you $5, and you are covering most of what you got. So that's really interesting as you're looking at the future of employment, as the future of the gig economy, of the future of work from home. This is a really interesting category. The third way that streamers make money is through sponsorships. So behind the streamer, you'll see Red Bull and you'll see Buffalo Wild Wings, you'll see Applebee's, you'll see Gillette, you'll see Geico, you'll see Intel all over. They're either wearing it on their jerseys, they're wearing it on t-shirts. They'll, in between games, like take a poster and talk about it. They'll put links where there's affiliate link marketing sort of business models here. But those are the primary three ways. So one, advertising, two, subscriptions, and three, sponsorships and advertising, that kind of thing.
So we've talked about esports as an emerging field. We've talked about streaming. We've talked about the casual gamer. We haven't talked about the underlying foundation of all of this, which is the actual video games themselves. Like, I know you have Electronic Arts. I know you have Tencent, Activision, Blizzard, a couple others, Sony, that are making games. But is there new startup and activity and innovation in the games as well? Or is it just the big players making big games?
So video gaming is a $140 billion industry. It's growing at about a 14% compound annual growth. Much of that revenue, somewhere I believe around 80 billion, comes from IP alone. So intellectual property, which is effectively the video games that you're talking about. Most of that revenue is generated by the top 10 to 20 guys. So you're looking at Tencent and Ubisoft and Activision and Riot and EA and all these guys. The most recently, you've got Bluehole with PUBG, you have Epic Games with Fortnite, and the list can keep going. But those guys really do dominate at the top. You do have innovation, though, at the bottom, where you have indie games, which is effectively kind of like indie films that are these flyers of, hey, maybe people will want to play this. That turns out really well sometimes. Fortnite was that. PUBG was that. Both of these games generates billions of dollars a year in revenue and have become, the next level of the top 20. So the answer is it's mostly the top. There's a ton of little games at the bottom, of which, in the App Store, about 10,000 new games gets uploaded to the mobile App Store every month. And so tons of people are trying to create games, but very few succeed. And so that's primarily because there's been a trend in the gaming industry where it's kind of become the big guys win and the little guys can't unless you have a $100 million budget. That is a very real dynamic in the industry today that I think over time will probably not change dramatically, but I think that you will see more games pop up that become really innovative and become Fortnite and become PUBG. Just last night you had Splitgate come out, a free game on Steam that's everyone's streaming right now on Twitch. And so, could that be the next big thing? Maybe. Look at Apex Legends, that's released by EA, but games come out that can become category changers. Impossible to predict, truly impossible to predict. That's why we don't invest in video games and we don't invest in professional esports teams. We invest in all the technology and infrastructure around this space because we don't like the binary risk of a game itself. Because I even as a gamer and doing this with 110% of my time, I still don't know what's going to be popular tomorrow.
Definitely hold that thought because I want to ask the investment questions, but I have two more questions that I need to get out of the way so I can come into that educated. These entertainers that you're talking about, do most of them seem to be indie creators, like people that are streaming and making a living streaming as entertainment? Do they seem to be indie creators who are doing all the infrastructure of like streaming and then posting the videos and managing some sort of audience engagement outside of that? Or are these people building small teams?
As they get larger, they are building small teams to help them out. A lot of times there are now agencies that represent them and help them. And so if you get above, I'm making up a number, 10,000 followers, 1,000 subscribers, then an agency, whether small or large, will start to take a look at you and say, hey, we'll take on all of your social media, all of your posts, all your graphics, all your social, everything. We'll take care of it for you, and we'll connect you with brands and sponsorship deals. And that's really meaningful for someone to be represented in the same way that people are represented in comedy and music and acting and everything. So this industry is really following a well-proven path there.
And so there's a whole bevy of games that people play competitively. So you can almost, I would assume, liken that to like you have the NBA and the NFL and the MLB. But I would love for you to kind of give us a primer on how many professional teams there can be. I was just explained what Cloud9 is, which seems like they span multiple leagues. What does the future of like stadiums look like? Because there's not a Columbus esports team. Will there be? Does it matter? I'm just giving you a lot of stuff that's in my head and going to let you organize it yourself and riff.
That's what great interviewers do right there. In case you're wondering, they just throw out a bunch of terms and then, yeah, you got this.
You got this. Make sense of what I don't know.
Please.
No, I love it. That's awesome. All right. With the backdrop of 3 billion people playing video games on the planet, right? You have this large, engaged audience of people that enjoy what they do very, very much on mobile, console, and PC. Secondly, you have this whole evolution of media entertainment that's starting to be built, that's already been built, but we're not even scratching the surface of through things like Twitch, YouTube, Mixer. Then people really start to take their casual hobbies more seriously. So then you get into the world of esports, where you get people competing, and then they're like, well, I really want to compete. Now I really want to compete. I want to compete at the highest level on the planet. And that's the evolution of what we have today called esports, the competitive layer on top of the bedrock of video gaming. That's what esports is. You can think of it as like kind of the icing on the cake, and that's really what's happening here. Video gaming, $140 billion industry, esports about a 1 to 1.5 billion. From a percentage standpoint, that's very small. From a audience level, that's very large, because you have 480 million people watching other people play video games. Also, 40% of those people watch people play games they do not play themselves, a stat that usually confuses the heck out of people. But what I would say is, have you ever played hockey before? I haven't, but hockey is one of the funnest things I've ever watched in my life. Now, stew on that for a few weeks, a few months, and then video gaming will start to make sense. It's a little hard to relate why you would watch Hearthstone or Dota right off the bat, but spend a few hours, have a few drinks with some friends, and this might start to make sense, just like your NHL, MLB, or NBA experiences. So when you come to the competitive scene of esports, you've got a lot of gamers that want to play. Eventually, what started happening over the last 10 to 20 years is people started saying, I'm going to put together a roster and we're going to play in the top tournaments in the world. We're going to play for prize money, sponsors, we're going to have jerseys and everything, very much like a traditional sports team. These esports teams are structured kind of like the university model. So if you take Duke University, Duke plays in men's lacrosse, women's basketball, women's basketball. They play in volleyball, and they will enter or exit those games and those sports based on whether they are popular, whether the economic model can work, etc. And the same is true of a group like Cloud9 or Fnatic or Team Liquid. They choose to enter Counter-Strike, Dota, League of Legends based on whether they are popular or not, whether they can find talent or not, whether they can afford it or not. And so they play in all these games and become essentially like a media conglomerate that plays across all these games. They manage the talent, they manage the schedules, they manage the salaries, et cetera, the brand, the social, and all that stuff. So these players become not only competitive athletes, but they also become icons, right? They become at the top of their level, where there's 100 million people playing League of Legends, and they're in the top 20 players on the planet. You better believe that these guys have 3 million followers on Twitter. These guys have more followers than most professional NBA athletes on Twitter. And so they are crushing it. And so this competitive scene has created a whole ecosystem not unlike traditional sports.
For context, do you know how many people play soccer?
No, it's got to be like 1 billion.
Okay.
That one's the crazy one, because it's like literally everyone can play.
Right.
What I think is interesting about gaming in regards to soccer is that the price to enter gaming is coming down so fast. And with the rise of things like 5G and global connectivity to the internet, you're going to see gaming become $5 a month, $8 a month to play a game versus the high cost that it has been historically and is today. And at that point, playing soccer or playing League of Legends all of a sudden just became pretty close. The brilliance behind soccer that hockey will never have, lacrosse will never have, is that it's cheap and it's affordable for the global population and everyone can connect with it. Whereas even with basketball, that can be hard. That's a very unique court that you need and all that kind of stuff. So
Eric's the lacrosse guy, and he was not a hockey guy. He could not play hockey, but both of those are inaccessible to me in my upbringing.
But like some of the most exciting stuff to watch. But yeah, in this analogy of like affordability and mass adoption, like there's no way hockey ever gets there. But like League of Legends could, and that's really fascinating.
So here's where I'd like to take this then. And I think you might have answered it when you compared esports more to an artist than a sport. You know, like if I go to a Murder by Death concert, band I like, I was thinking Taylor Swift, which would be a weird example. So we're going to take a band I like.
You also like Taylor Swift. You don't have to lie about it.
I love Taylor Swift as well.
Okay, so let's say I'm going to a Taylor Swift concert. I don't go to a Taylor Swift concert because she's from Columbus. She's not from Columbus. I'm a fan of her otherwise. So is that the argument for the lack or probable lack of esports stadiums or like geographically located teams?
So I would say that the traditional athlete like LeBron James or Cristiano Ronaldo is a good comparison for the professional esports athlete who plays in the professional teams. They are very similar of like skill level, top of their game, fandom. They become sponsored. They play in tournaments. They have training. They have coaches. They have houses. They have psychological coaches, everything. On the artist side of like an entertainer like Jimmy Fallon or Taylor Swift or Tom Cruise, that is more like the streamer world of the entertainer becoming more like that. But both are now coexisting. One says, hey, look, I don't have time to stream 14 hours a day. I train 14 hours a day, and I don't need you to watch me do that. The other guy's like, hey, I want you to watch me. I'm super funny and entertaining. You should watch me, and that's how I'm going to build my audience. So those two are coexisting in esports just as they do in the more broader entertainment industry around music and sports. When you look at the evolution of, to your question around cities, gaming by nature is very geo-agnostic. And so it's kind of globally distributed. But the Overwatch League is taking the approach of a city-based model. Overwatch is a game owned by Activision Blizzard. They sold their first franchise spots for 20 million each, and then they sold the next ones for 35 million each. This league, unfortunately, has viewership that's quite down from season 1 to season 2 because the viewership experience is not ideal. But they have approached it more as a city-based league. The Houston Outlaws, the Dallas Fuel, the San Francisco Shock. They have teams in China and Korea, and they're taking more of the city approach. Traditionally, though, esports has followed more of a just agnostic wherever approach. We're going to host a tournament in LA, but we don't care if you fly in from Brazil, Holland, or Sacramento. We really don't care. So just come and play. And so this is actually a very active discussion in esports right now of should it be city-based, should it not? My argument is I'm not really sure if there's an answer to that yet. I don't think it's as clear-cut as, hey, let's not assume that what worked for sports should have to work for esports. They're very different. It's like putting a square into a circle peg. Like it's just, they're different. And the community is different. The adoption is different. And unfortunately, most of the money that's come into esports has primarily been from traditional sports and sports owners of that. But we think that doesn't always make sense. There are many things that can be learned and drawn from, like sponsorships and professionalism and player contracts. But geolocation-based stuff for an industry that over the last 50 years has been inherently global, I don't know if that's something we can just take a hard right turn at in 2019.
It's interesting because if it's geo-agnostic, that means you can segment teams on really whatever you want. You can segment them on anything that's like based on tribalism, right? That you can have a fan base around. So you could have a team that's like super pro tax reform, and that's like what they do. And then you're just like on their side because of it.
That's fascinating. This tribal thing is like, that might be the answer. I was thinking like, you're always going to have fans that jump on the bandwagon of like a really good team. And you're going to have people that are rooting for an underdog. But if you have 30 teams in a league, you're going to have like 20 plus middling teams. How do they grow a fan base?
Like they're all farmers or they're all whatever. Like they have something in common that threads them together and connects them with the fan base that isn't geography, which is what we've relied on heavily to date. I want to get to Konvoy, and I want to get to what Konvoy invests in, because you just gave us like this incredible lesson about what the landscape looks like. So with that in mind, where are you interested in putting your LP's money?
Absolutely. So we are a early stage seed Series A fund based in Denver, Colorado. We are focused on investing into the tech and infrastructure and picks and shovels of esports and video gaming. So let me break that down. There are 3 ways to invest into esports and video gaming today. 1, you can invest in games themselves. Try to pick the next Fortnite, try to pick the next PUBG. That's incredibly binary. It could turn out incredible. It probably won't. 2, you can invest in pro teams. You can go invest in Cloud9. 24 months ago, Cloud9 was worth under 100 million. Now they're worth north of 300 million. These teams are going to surpass $1 billion valuations within the decade, no question. And so that's a second way, but their business models are incredibly early. These are overvalued at this time. They trade about 15 to 20 times revenue, many times more than that, when traditional sports teams trade at 5 times revenue. And so that 3x delta would inherently tell you that, hey, there must be a scalable business model here. Today, that is not the case. And so therefore, we're avoiding teams because we think they're overvalued. The third way to invest in this is to invest in the technologies and the infrastructure and the picks and shovels of the space. Analogies of this are like, own the pipes, not the oil. If you come from oil, you want to own, the infrastructure behind this industry, not whatever is kind of front and center. And so we take that approach. Tangible examples of that are, we would have wanted to be, and I wish we had been, but we weren't, some of the earliest investors into companies like Twitch or Discord, right? Multiple billion-dollar companies that are game agnostic and game genre agnostic, that provide a service or a platform, whether B2B or B2C, to this industry. And so this includes a ton of different companies, but this industry we're focused on esports and video gaming because, as I mentioned before, video gaming is a $140 billion bedrock. That's more than double the size of Hollywood and music combined as an industry. And so this is the largest digital entertainment industry that's happening right now. And we're very excited about it. And that's what we're focused on.
I have a follow-up question on that. But first, is there anyone investing in baskets of streamers? Because they have this kind of like maybe an income sharing agreement type investment, not a VC investment. I'm just generally curious if people are investing in like 100 streamers, and if a couple of them hit, then they do well. Is that even like a thing that people are doing right now?
Not quite yet, but that's coming as platforms like Twitch or YouTube or third-party service providers to Twitch and YouTube, of which there are hundreds, create augmented services to that ecosystem. Yes, I could see that happening for sure. I think the way that's playing out today is the agency model of a bunch of people go get 10 streamers and sponsor them or lump them together under their portfolio and hoping that one of them becomes Ninja. That's probably the way they're playing that out today. I think that more and more you'll see that happen programmatically versus manually, where you'll say, if you're over XYZ KPIs in your engagement or followers or something, you will qualify for a selection program to qualify for XYZ sponsorship dollars or XYZ partnerships that will happen automatically at scale. And that, I think that's where we get. So what's not scalable in the agency model and the hand holding and the one by one becomes scalable when you have tens and hundreds of thousands of entertainers that have super engaged audiences that brands and sponsors want access to at scale, not hand by hand.
It's almost a quantitative investing approach at that point, which is crazy because then it becomes all about the data. So you have to have cross-platform data. That's a fascinating example and idea.
One interesting thing about esports and video gaming is that it is probably the most data-driven ecosystem on the planet. Everything is tracked. Every last thing in gaming is tracked, from your reaction time to your cursor to how fast, whether you turn left or right faster. Everything in sports has to be inputted either manually or semi-manually. Very little of it is like truly can be tracked 100%, right? If anything, we're going to be at 50 to 90% accuracy on, machine vision stuff on that kind of thing. But in gaming, it's all tracked. It's also trackable, right? Whether we're tracking it or not, we could probably do it. And so that's a really interesting data set to build an almost infinite number of services and startups around.
One quick question on that, and I know Jay is biting.
I have like 3 quick questions. You haven't given me a quick question.
Nice. He's being so nice, and he wants to jump in. You said everything can be tracked. Are there technologies out there that can track the viewers as well? Like, can it see? Is there like camera technologies where it can see where my eyeballs are looking or what I'm doing, as opposed to just from the gamer side of where they're moving, what they're doing, how they're interacting with the interface? Like,
on a preliminary level, yes. On a creepy level, no. So I think when you talk about taking over people's cameras, thank goodness that's not taking place, at least we hope. But, I think it's definitely possible. It'd be interesting if one day we got to the point where consumers opt into that in exchange for something of value, money or something, because that data would become so valuable around, consumer interactions or laughter or frowning or smiles to different entertainers, giving them real feedback versus likes or not likes on Facebook. I think we're at the earliest stages of what consumer feedback really looks like versus just ranting on Reddit. I think 10 years from now, we'll see the downvote and the upvote as archaic, but it works for now. And it shows that people actually want to make their voice heard. And why not, instead of just your digital click or keyboard, make it your audio voice or your facial features or something really of interesting feedback.
What's the replay value and user behavior on watching recorded streams that they missed live? And are people tuning in mostly to live streams, and then if not, they're not watching the replay? And are people watching as if it's like Super Bowl 30 and saying like, I remember that game, I'm going to go watch it again?
On the professional esports scene, a lot of people will watch replays of different matches if you're a diehard fan, just like you'll watch the replay of the Sunday football game. But if you miss a stream, you're probably not going to go watch that stream because it was probably a 4 to 8 hour stream. You're probably just going to watch whatever's live. That's been my experience with different streamers. I don't exactly have the data to back that up today, but that's my gut read on the community right now.
Okay, my last question. We got a little bit away from Konvoy. Can you tell us about the investments that Konvoy has made to date?
Absolutely. To date, we've made 3 public investments. One into a game developer tool called Game of Whales that helps game developers with churn. 2, we invested into Ascot Entertainment in Vancouver. It's a white label B2B esports betting platform. And 3, our third one is into Opera Event, which allows for programmatic monetization of the influencer world at scale. And so those are 3 examples of us making investments into technology companies and B2B or B2C service providers in the video game and esports space.
And if you could share, what did you like about one or all of those companies?
First and foremost, it's the founders. Each of the founding teams of these companies are well-seasoned and accomplished founders who are a pleasure to work with. They're incredibly intelligent. They know their vertical incredibly well. And so that's the type of founder we like to back. Secondly, it's certainly the product and traction is fantastic for each of them. And thirdly, they're working in a very large market. So game developer tools is huge. Esports betting is a massive market that's undertapped. And influencer monetization is something that people have been trying to figure out how to do at scale. And we believe Opera Event is tackling it in the right way. So it really comes down to the founders and the product and then the market size. And in that order, I think that order is very important for us. We all know that gaming is a big market. So that order is really important to us.
Awesome. Well, this has been fascinating. And I'm sure Eric and I have a ton of questions that we can ask you in a part 2, maybe down the line. But for now, for the listeners, if they want to learn more about you or the work that Konvoy does, where should they go?
Absolutely. You can go to konvoy.vc, which is our website. If you're a founder, building something great in gaming or esports, we'd love for you to apply and reach out to us. You can also follow our Medium page. That's where we have a lot of content talking about the space, insights, and kind of we publish 2 pieces a week talking about current events. If you're an investor or a family office looking at this space, we'd love to talk to you about how to put capital to work in this space. But all 3 of those ways are ways you can reach out to us and follow us. And we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter. But those are some great ways to reach out to us.
All right, Jay, we just spoke with Josh from Konvoy, and that was fact-filled. That was filled with facts.
I think I have more notes on this interview than I have on any other interview that we've taken to date.
How do you take notes? I'm curious about this.
I have an Evernote document for everyone we interview. Standard format, where at the top I have the date of the interview and relevant links to their LinkedIn, their Crunchbase, and their website. Then I have a section for the pre-interview where I have the name of the guest, their company, the basic stuff that we found in research, followed by the interview section, which is just an open field for notes. I do bullet points, things like grew up in Asia, Latin America, was a son of a U.S. diplomat. Things like facts. Sometimes when you ask the KPI questions, I'll write KPIs, and below that, I'll have some bullet points on that. So this is really just marking points in the interview and things that I think will be useful for the 3rd segment of our show.
All right, well, that was way more depth into your note-taking process than I was expecting, but I asked the question, and here we are. So let's talk esports. We came into this thinking esports is big, very big, lots of valuations that are very big. The joke here is that everyone thinks that esports is going to be massive, and it felt like no one knew why. I feel like we got some insight into that here.
I really liked the stark contrast in so many aspects of esports to other professional athletics. And Josh made the point that it is not most closely compared to athletics, but instead more about music and arts. And I really love that framework. And I love the framework that he shared with people who are on Twitch versus professional esports athletes, and comparing that to television entertainers versus actors in movies. I love that some of the things he shared about the age and the demographics of these people is just very different than people who are traditionally consuming media in professional sports specifically. So yeah, as you said, very fact-filled, very stark in contrast to a lot of the customers and consumers of media that we hear generally. What stuck out to you?
I really just like how he broke down the differences. And I mean, I had questions about streamers, and you kind of went through a lot of this already, but the streaming versus the esports versus all of this, and what's going to be what, and how is it going to work together, and how do all the big players fit in? Because right now, one of the biggest questions I've had about esports from an investing perspective is, why are there no pre-Series A companies? Everything is like, oh, there's this company that just started and they just raised $40 million. Or there's this team and Drake invested $100 million in them. Or there's this, or there's this. And the numbers are just so big in this space. I feel like it's been impossible to find really small companies in this space. And I think that's kind of due to the way the industry has been structured over the last 20 years, which is there's a handful of big players that make all the games, that control all the access, and there's only room to innovate really around the infrastructure that kind of connects all these things together, which is why Twitch just blew up.
Yeah, to Josh's point, you said there are 3 ways to invest in esports and gaming: the games themselves, professional teams, and the picks and shovels, as he puts it. And Konvoy is interested in the picks and shovels, which we see that same trend following on in industries like cannabis. People who are investing in cannabis now are much more interested in the picks and shovels type businesses than the growers, you know? So I don't know, Eric, after leaving this interview, are you more interested in getting into esports or less interested? Not as a consumer, as a potential investor.
I would consider myself significantly more interested. I think there's a lot of this picks and shovels and pipes that needs to be built out, that will be built out. And if the growth projections are correct, I mean, connecting all of these things is going to be huge. And just because it's global doesn't mean that there's not going to be niches that develop. Just like the internet, there's niches that develop, and you can't just have one thing that does everything really well. So I think there's going to be a ton of opportunity here. I also think, and I know this wasn't Konvoy's perspective, but I think that there's probably some really good money to be made in developing an amazing indie games fund. Someone who invests, maybe it's a studio or maybe it's a fund, but someone who invests in amazing indie games.
Totally agree with you. There's a firm in Columbus called Multivarious, and they started as indie game developers themselves. And then they started putting on this conference called GDEX, which is the largest game development conference in definitely the Midwest, but I think it's like the second or third largest conference in North America. And so they've built all these relationships with incredible indie game developers, and they are like in the prime position to do exactly what you're saying. But they're so different from anything that the investment or startup community has seen here that they can't get much of any attention, because when they describe their pitch, they talk about wanting to be like the Hollywood studio for video games in the Midwest. And I think that's just like such a compelling pitch. And they understand the industry. They have the connections that they could be that fun too. But I'm totally aligned with what you're saying. This is kind of a digression, but I love that company.
Yeah, but it's a helpful digression because it gets to the point that there's underserved areas of this market that everyone's looking at and saying, oh, this is big. Like all the big money is kind of chasing this space and everyone just kind of agrees that it's going to get bigger, but the money's not following. I don't understand where the innovation is going to come from right now in the way that it's all set up. So you have these funds like Konvoy that are hard to find, or companies like Multivarious that are hard to find. And a lot of things right now are just hard to find. So I am very bullish on the future of this. I think that you have kind of a take on the loneliness crisis that we as a country are facing. And I think it plays into this overarching thesis of video games as a way to connect.
It's such a fascinating community and culture, like what's going on Twitch, similar to YouTube in some ways, but I was really curious about the replay value because some people just Twitch all day and it's hours and hours and hours. And I couldn't think that anyone was watching that replay. And it sounds like that's not really user behavior. People will tune in when things are live and they like that live aspect. There was somebody that they had a pretty popular Twitch stream, I think still do, just watching them sleep. Like some weird stuff going on Twitch. And even when you land on twitch.com, if you, dear listener, haven't spent time at twitch.com, go to twitch.com, take an account. You immediately feel like you're in a very different place. Just from the UI, it feels extremely different than what you would see on like a YouTube. And that's really interesting to me to learn more about. So this has given me the spur to kind of dive deeper into that creator and maker community, if not just for my own personal interest.
I don't think that Twitch, Mixer, and YouTube will be the end-all be-all of live streaming platforms. I think there will be, at some point, a deluge? I really should get better at words if I'm going to be hosting a podcast.
Oh, Deluge Beckham?
What? That might have been the worst joke on the podcast in history.
They don't all hit. They don't all hit. Most of them do. Some of them don't.
Anyway, a deluge of these platforms that are going to pop up. I think that you'll see more and more of them trying to compete with Twitch and YouTube and Mixer, but in specific niche verticals.
Well, dear listener, the obvious next step for us is to talk to some companies in the esports and video gaming industry. So if you know anyone who would be a good guest for our show, we'd love to hear from you. You can tweet at us at UpsideFM or email us hello@upside.fm. That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter at UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside Podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
never mind. Bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming, find a way.